"The house isn't yours," he hissed, rain streaking down the window like claw marks. "You're lucky we let you stay." The room went silent long enough to hear the grandfather clock swallow its own tick. Then I set the envelope on the dining table, thick, cream, sealed with a blue notary stamp, and I said with a voice steadier than my hands, "Read it, Richard. Or are you afraid of paper?" That was the moment the world inside the Whitaker house tilted, not because of the envelope, because my daughter-in-law, bright, careful Nora, was standing behind Richard with my granddaughter Lily, and both of them had bruises they weren't wearing yesterday. If you've ever felt the instant when a mother's love hardens into something sharper, you know how all the background noise burns away, the rain, the clock, the muttering relatives. All of it melted, and only one thought remained. Not again. My name is Margaret Whitaker, 58, widow, retired ICU nurse, who still counts heartbeats in elevators. For 34 years, I held this family together with casseroles, overtime, and forgiveness I could barely afford. My late husband, Thomas, built Whitaker Construction from a tool belt and stubbornness. I held the invoices and the holidays. When cancer took him 2 winters ago, he left behind a company, a lake house, 2 grown children, Richard and Elena, and one promise whispered into my hair in the hospice hall. "Keep them safe, Maggie." Keep what matters safe, I tried. I tried while grief rearranged the furniture in my chest. I paid the property taxes on the lake house after Richard forgot I watched Nora fold laundry with the quiet speed of a woman who has learned to disappear. I babysat Lily and noticed how she flinched at sudden laughs. I cooked the way Thomas liked because cooking was a way to summon him back for an hour. And when the first whispers about the will started, when Richard said Dad surely intended the company to be his and that the rest was negotiable, I chose to believe that families speak love more fluently than they speak money. Foolish, perhaps, but hope is a language that keeps you warm, at least until the bill arrives. Tonight was supposed to be a simple dinner. Elena had flown in from Denver with a carry-on smile and the kind of hug that forgives a long absence. The table held rosemary chicken and the Whitaker china we only use to pretend we are still the good version of ourselves. Rain ferried the dark closer. Richard arrived late, a prince without a crown, rolled-up sleeves and a cologne that smelled like ambition. He kissed Lily's head and missed her eyes. Nora carried a pie and an apology for the pie, as if pastry could offend anyone here. My sister-in-law, Valerie, came armed with opinions and a scarf wound around her neck like a warning sign. If you've ever hosted grief and pride at the same table, you'll recognize the sound, a soft clatter, the tense music of silverware, negotiating territory. We said grace. We tried discipline against the chaos, a formal sentence placed like a lid on boiling water. For the food, the hands that prepared it, the roof, the rain, Lily whispered earnest. I added silently, for truth, wherever it hides. The first crack opened when Valerie lifted her wine and said too loudly, to Thomas, who built an empire and knew which of his children could run it. Elena shifted. Richard smiled the way a wolf smiles at a fence. To Dad, he said, and his eyes slid to the empty head chair as if expecting it to answer him. Nora served slices. I noticed the faint yellowing beneath the sleeve of her cardigan, a fingerprint-shaped bloom. When I touched her wrist to take the plate, she flinched so slightly anyone else would have missed it. But I have spent a lifetime reading pain that pretends to be fine. "Are you all right, honey?" I asked, pushing warmth into every syllable. "Of course," she said. And then Lily, from the end of the table, lifted her small chin and added, "We're fine, Grandma." She lied like a child who has decided lying is part of love. Richard cleared his throat, gathered the silverware of the moment. "Since we're all here," he began, "it's practical to discuss the transition. Dad's estate, the company, the lake house logistics." He spoke like a meeting that had been waiting for us to arrive. "I've already been acting CEO for a year." It makes sense that I continue as majority owner. The house. He gestured around as if the walls were a spreadsheet. Mom can stay as long as she wants, naturally. But paperwork should reflect reality. Everyone will be treated fairly fair. The word never looks so cheap as when it is spoken by someone who has already taken his share. Elena placed her fork down with ceremony. Richard, no one has seen the will yet. He smiled without teeth. Dad and I talked, Lena. He was clear. Then why? I asked softly. Are you afraid of the envelope? All heads turned as I took it from my purse. The cream paper looked like it belonged to another century, something that traveled inside a ship's trunk. The blue notary seal flashed under the chandelier. Richard's smile stayed, his knuckles whitened. Valerie leaned forward, scenting drama like rain. Where did you get that, Margaret? From our attorney this afternoon, I said. The updated will Thomas signed 3 weeks before he died. Silence folds differently when money is in the room. Even the rain paused to listen. Elena reached for my hand under the table. Richard's eyes went to Nora first. He always checked his audience. Then to Lily, who was watching him with the steady attention of a child deciding what kind of man her father is. Mom, he said, light, patronizing. Dad couldn't sign anything then. He was on morphine. Pain does not erase intent, I said, and your father was lucid. He made choices that day because he watched the way you made yours. Valerie laughed, a brittle sound. Oh, please. Thomas adored Richard. Thomas adored what he built, I said, and heard my own voice sharpen, the way it does when a nurse must be obeyed because someone's oxygen is dropping. He wanted it to outlive him. That is not the same as indulging the loudest son. Nora set her fork down. The movement exposed the underside of her wrist, and the bruise that had been politely hiding came into full view like a planet lifting from eclipse. Elena's breath caught. My heart did a quiet surgical pivot. Lily watched my face. Who did that? I asked, because sometimes naming a thing opens the door it's behind. I bumped a shelf, Nora said too quickly. Richard's jaw tensed. We're not making this a spectacle. Spectacles happen, I replied, when truth isn't invited politely. He stood, chair scraping. Give me the envelope. No, I said, enunciating each letter as if I were teaching him to read. We will open it together after dinner. He laughed then, loud, careless. You're trembling, Mom. Yes, I said. I'm tired of practicing fear. Some families fracture over politics. We were shattering over pronouns. Mine, yours, ours. Elena started stacking plates for a truce. Valerie recited tax facts at the air. Nora's hands shook as she poured water. And Lily, small brave Lily, reached under the tablecloth and slipped something into my palm. A key. New, cool, taped to a folded index card. In careful child printing. Grandma, please read later. Love, L. Behind Richard's shoulder, Nora met my eyes with a look that was both apology and urgency. It said, not here. It said, later. It said, please. Let's have pie, I suggested, because sometimes the only bridge to the next minute is sugar. We ate in procedural silence, the kind hospitals teach you when grief lives in the next room. When the plates were empty, I stood and carried the envelope to the dining room sideboard, where Thomas used to put his cufflinks. I laid it down like a photograph of him. Before we open this, I said, I want to tell you a story. My voice didn't shake now. The rain had settled into a steady percussion section. The clock remembered how to tick. It's about the summer your father and I almost lost everything, I went on. When the bank called our loan and the truck broke down and the only thing left of our pride was the part that kept us from asking your grandfather for help. Thomas was furious with himself. He smashed a mug. Then he swept it up. That's who he was. Rage, then responsibility. He built a cradle for Elena that night, said, if I can't build the future, I'll build the place where it sleeps. And when we met with the bank the next day, he fought with numbers and kindness until they blinked and gave us another month. I touched the envelope. Your father always believed in second chances, and he believed people reveal themselves most clearly when they think no one is watching. I looked at Richard. Your father did not leave behind a company, so his son could learn how to bully in conference rooms. Richard smirked. Touching speech. Are we done? Elena bristled. Why are you rushing? If you're so sure what Dad wanted— I am sure, he snapped. Dad wanted strength in leadership. Strength, I said gently, without decency is just noise. He reached for the envelope. My hand was quicker. So were my words. Sit down, Richard. He sat. Surprise can be obedience's cousin. Across the table, Lily's foot nudged mine. A secret knock. I palmed the key, the card. My pocket became a promise. Now, if you're watching this and your chest is tight because you've sat at a table where love had to share a chair with fear, hear me. You were not imagining it. The room really did tilt. The silence really was heavy. And the bruise you saw and tried to explain away, it was exactly what you thought it was. If you were me, would you open the envelope now, or would you wait until the right pair of eyes could see it? Because here is the truth I have not told them yet. The envelope is only the first match, and there is a room in this house that has been kept locked for months. And tonight, for the first time, I have the key. Before diving into today's dramatic story, don't forget to subscribe to Twist Stories and turn on the notification bell. Here, you'll always find tales of sacrifice, betrayal, and unexpected twists. Where are you watching from? Leave a comment below. Who knows, the next story might just remind you of your own experience. If it were you, would you unlock that room first or tear open the envelope? Tell me in the comments, because the next choice Margaret makes will decide who this house truly belongs to. Have you ever witnessed a family dinner where respect vanished between bites? You're not alone, and your story matters here. The key was colder than I expected. Lily's careful handwriting. Grandma, please read later. Love, L. Pressed against my palm like a secret. The dining room emptied. Richard adjusted his tie. Valerie rambled about taxes. Elena stayed silent, and Nora tidied with Lily clinging to her hand, rubbing at the bruise hidden beneath her sleeve. When the last glass clinked, I excused myself to the study. The cedar-scented room still held Thomas's presence. Inside the wall safe, I found an envelope marked Will, final instructions, along with a ledger of suspicious transfers, consultant fees to shell corporations, accounts I'd never seen, dates matching Richard's rise to CEO. Thomas's updated will confirmed what I had already shown at dinner. The company and lake house were in trust, with me as trustee for Elena and Lily's benefit. But one clause startled me. If any shareholder engaged in abuse or financial misconduct, I had the power to strip them of control. Alongside the will lay another folded document, a list of shadow payments annotated in Thomas's handwriting. Check with Robert. My chest tightened. Richard was siphoning money. I locked the safe again, my lungs heavy. Back in the kitchen, Nora scrubbed a spoon, sleeves tugged low. Lily showed me the key, I said. Her composure cracked. She's so smart, she whispered, voice breaking. When I pressed further, she admitted she thought apologies and smiles would stop the abuse. I'd seen too many women like her in hospitals, hiding bruises, clinging to survival. Elena's voice was low. Richard told me not to make waves. Said Dad wanted continuity? No, I said. Thomas wanted love, not tyranny. Together we built a plan. I would take the documents to Gerald, our family lawyer, and seek an injunction. Elena would request payroll records under the guise of planning a memorial. Nora would begin documenting, and Lily, brave Lily, would keep watching. The conflict sharpened when Richard declared he was restricting family access to the lake house until the estate issue is resolved. That's not your call, Elena snapped. I am CEO. he replied. Protecting it from whom? I asked. He smirked. From people who don't understand business. Elena countered, accusing him of funneling money to fake consultants. He laughed too loudly. You're paranoid. You call concern paranoia when it threatens your comfort, I told him. The room thickened as Valerie defended him, and Brian begged us not to make things ugly. I knew then. Money was his weapon, and silence his shield. That night, restless, I called my father, Robert. Calm as ever, he listened. Bring me everything, he said. We'll protect your granddaughter. You did the right thing. His words were permission, what I had long needed. Anger hardened into resolve. This wasn't revenge, it was reclaiming. Before bed, I tucked the key and card into my drawer and whispered a promise. We will not be silent just because silence is easier. We will not trade dignity for convenience. The next morning, Richard called. Lily will stay with Valerie this weekend. She needs breathing room. His voice was syrupy, too smooth. You don't decide where my granddaughter stays, I told him. He hung up, smug in his attempt to seize control. But I recognized the move. Predators rush to act before scrutiny arrives. The siege had begun. Documents whispering theft, bruises hidden under sleeves, smiles masking lies. I had the will, the ledger, and now a child's key. The fight ahead would be brutal, but I was no longer powerless. If you've ever watched kindness used as a mask for cruelty, you know this moment. Tell me, would you confront first and risk losing proof, or gather evidence until the hammer cannot be ignored? I chose to gather. The lawyer's office smelled of dust and quiet ambition. Gerald Whitman had represented our family for nearly 3 decades, a thin man with spectacles always perched halfway down his nose, and a pen that clicked whenever he was about to speak the truth bluntly. Elena and I sat across from him, a pile of documents spread between us like a battlefield. The will, the ledger, Thomas's notes, all of it was there, waiting to be understood. Gerald adjusted his glasses. Margaret, these entries are serious. If what you're suggesting is true, Richard could face civil and even criminal liability. Embezzlement is not a word we use lightly. Elena leaned forward. Can we stop him from selling the company assets? He's already freezing us out of the lake house. Yes, Gerald said. The will grants you trustee powers. With this clause, he tapped the conditional safety provision, his pen sharp against the page. You can petition the court to suspend his authority, but we'll need to show credible evidence of misconduct, not just suspicion. These notes are a start, but we need official records. Bank statements, accounting ledgers, perhaps testimony from staff. I exhaled slowly. Proof. Always the mountain between harm and justice. Then we gather, I said. Back home, Asi and I found Nora in the garden, pulling weeds as if trying to erase something stubborn from the earth. Lily played nearby, tracing circles in the dirt with a stick. I knelt beside Nora. We went to Gerald, I told her. There's a way forward, but it will take courage. Her hand stilled. Do you know what courage costs, Margaret? Every time I stood up to Richard, he found a way to remind me I belonged to him. A slammed door. A threat whispered in Lily's ear. It's not just bruises, it's the fear that spreads like mold. I touched her wrist gently. And what do you think silence costs? It robs Lily of the belief that women can be safe in their own homes. It robs you of the dignity you deserve. It robs Thomas's legacy of honesty. Nora's eyes brimmed. She looked at Lily, who hummed softly as she drew. I want her to see a different ending, she whispered. That evening, I tested Richard's temper. At dinner, I mentioned casually that Gerald was reviewing the company's structure. His fork froze mid-air. You're meddling where you don't belong, he snapped. Thomas made me trustee, I reminded him. It's not meddling, it's honoring his wishes. His laugh was short and sharp. You're a nurse, Mom, not a business strategist. Leave the company to people who understand it. You mean leave it to you, Elena countered. Her voice shook, but her eyes did not. You've been moving money. Don't deny it, we've seen the ledgers. Richard's face darkened. You don't know what you're talking about. Then explain it, I said. Explain the payments to Havenbrook Consulting, to Sterling Advisors, names that don't even have office listings. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Valerie shifted uncomfortably. Brian stared into his glass. Finally, Richard sneered. You wouldn't understand. This is strategy, expansion. You think Dad built this company by playing it safe? I leaned forward, my voice low but firm. Your father built this company by showing up every morning at 5 a.m. with coffee in his thermos and decency in his hands, not by stealing the table fractured. Valerie muttered that we were being dramatic. Brian excused himself, but the power had shifted, slightly, invisibly, like the first crack in ice before a thaw. Richard knew we were watching him. He knew we had more than suspicion. That night, Lily crept into my room. She handed me another note folded small. Daddy talks on the phone when he thinks we're asleep. He says, they'll never find out. Her eyes were wide, scared but steady. Grandma, can you stop him? I gathered her into my arms. Yes, sweetheart, I whispered. We can. And in that moment, the turning point arrived. It wasn't the will or the ledger or Gerald's careful words. It was Lily's quiet courage, choosing truth over fear. If a child could risk telling, then so could we. The next morning, I called Robert. His voice, steady as ever, was a balm. You're doing the right thing, Maggie, he said. Truth is a slow march, but it always arrives. I hung up with resolve curling in my chest like a banner in the wind. For years, I had been the nurse, the mother, the widow, the one who patched and endured. But now I was the trustee, the protector, the woman who carried both a will and a key. Richard thought control was his birthright. He was about to learn it was conditional, because Thomas hadn't just left us a company, he had left us a way out. If you've ever been told you're too weak, too naive, too unqualified to defend what matters, remember this. Strength is not always loud. Sometimes it's a grandmother opening a safe. Sometimes it's a child passing a note under the table. Sometimes it's silence that gathers evidence instead of obeying fear. If it were you, would you confront Richard now, risking a storm, or wait until the legal net is ready to catch him? Tell me in the comments, because Margaret's next step will decide whether this family collapses under his lies or rises on truth. The storm did not break with thunder. It arrived in whispers, letters, and subpoenas. Gerald filed the injunction within days, his voice steady as stone when he told us, Richard no longer holds unchecked power. The court will decide, not his temper. That paper shield was the first wall between his fist and our lives, but walls are tested. Richard called for a family meeting at the lake house, trying to reclaim ground with the force of authority. He framed it as clarification, but I knew the move well. Abusers don't argue to resolve, they argue to control. We arrived cautious. Elena with a folder of accounting notes, Nora with bruises fading but eyes sharper than I had ever seen. Lily clutched my hand until her knuckles whitened. Robert, my father, stood beside me like a soldier ready to guard his own. Cane in one hand, resolve in the other. Inside, Richard was already pacing. Valerie perched on the sofa, sipping wine, pretending it was a cocktail party rather than a tribunal. Brian sat with shoulders slumped, torn between loyalty and silence. Richard's opening words sliced the air. You've embarrassed this family. You've dragged Dad's name through the mud. All because you can't handle business, I let him finish before laying Gerald's letter on the table. This, I said evenly, is an injunction. Until the court rules, you do not move funds, you do not alter property, and you do not touch the company accounts." His jaw clenched. "You can't do this." "I already did," I replied. Elena pulled out her folder. "We traced the payments. Havenbrook Consulting doesn't exist. Sterling Advisors? A P.O. box in Nevada. The money goes into holding accounts under your name." Nora spoke next, voice trembling but audible. "And the bruises weren't accidents, Richard." "I'm done covering for you." She tugged her sleeve up, revealing fading marks on her arm. Lily's small gasp was the only sound in the room. Richard's mask cracked. "You're lying." "No," Robert said, voice like gravel. "I've seen this before. A man who thinks power is his shield, but paper doesn't bleed, son. People do." Richard slammed his fist against the table, sending glasses rattling. "You're destroying me. This company is mine." "It was never yours," I said, my voice low but steady. "It was your father's legacy." "And legacies are earned, not stolen." He turned to Valerie, desperate. "Tell them." But Valerie shifted in her seat, avoiding his gaze. Self-preservation had finally outweighed alliance. Silence fell, thick, suffocating, until Lily's small voice cut through. "Daddy, I don't like when you yell. Grandma keeps us safe." It was the final fracture. Richard's fury faltered, if only for a second. In that pause, Gerald, who had accompanied us quietly, stepped forward with 2 officers. "Richard Whitaker, you are hereby served. You'll appear in court to answer for financial misconduct and breach of fiduciary duty." Richard's eyes burned holes through me, but his hands were tied by more than rage now. The law had entered the room. As the officers led him out, the room exhaled. Valerie excused herself, muttering about not knowing. Brian sat in silence, tears gathering at the edges of his eyes. "And Nora?" She straightened her back, looked at me, and whispered, "We're free." Not free yet, I thought, but freer than yesterday. That night, I tucked Lily into bed at my house. She handed me one last folded note she'd been keeping. "Grandma, thank you for listening." I kissed her forehead. "Listening is where change begins, sweetheart." In the quiet, I realized this wasn't just about Richard. It was about every woman told to stay silent, every family that hid bruises behind closed doors, every legacy at risk of being rewritten by greed. Thomas had left me more than property. He had left me the duty to stand when others were forced to kneel. And I had. If you were Margaret, standing at that table with proof in one hand and family history in the other, would you risk tearing the family apart to save what matters? Or would you stay silent, hoping peace could still be salvaged? Because sometimes silence is the storm. The house was quieter after Richard left, though quiet does not always mean peace. Silence can hold grief, relief, and the ache of rebuilding all at once. For days, I found myself replaying the scene. His fists on the table, Nora's trembling confession, Lily's brave little voice. The images lived behind my eyelids like lanterns, flickering, unsteady, but bright enough to guide. In the weeks that followed, Gerald moved like clockwork. Subpoenas brought paper trails out of shadows. Auditors traced money that had slipped through cracks Richard carved with arrogance. The court suspended his authority indefinitely. He faced not only civil suits, but potential criminal charges. Valerie distanced herself, suddenly interested in new beginnings. Brian, poor Brian, confessed he had noticed discrepancies, but feared rocking the boat. Fear can be a cruel chain, but confession can also be the first step toward breaking it. The company board voted unanimously to place Elena as interim CEO under my trusteeship. She stood at the front of that boardroom, nervous, yes, but resolute. "Dad built this company with integrity," she said. We will not let greed dismantle it. For the first time since Thomas's death, I felt his presence not as loss, but as legacy. Nora filed for separation with the lawyer's guidance. She cried the night she signed the papers, but her tears were not of regret. They were of release. I thought I had to choose between survival and dignity, she admitted, but maybe I can have both. I hugged her, whispering, "You already do." Lily began sleeping through the night again. No more whispered notes under pillows, no more wide-eyed glances at slammed doors. Childhood was returning to her in small, miraculous steps. A giggle at cartoons, a splash in the lake, the fearless way she asked questions again. One evening, as the sun dipped gold across the lake, I sat alone on the porch with Thomas's final letter, the one he had addressed simply to Margaret. His handwriting was steady. If you're reading this, it means I could not be there to shield you. But I trust you more than I trust walls, banks, or contracts. You are the keeper of this family, Maggie. Protect them not with silence, but with truth. Truth may break us in the moment, but lies will ruin us forever. I pressed the letter to my heart. He had known. Not the details, perhaps, but the risk of leaving power unchecked. And he had armed me with something stronger than property or title: permission to act. Months later, we gathered again at the long dining table. No shouting this time, no bruises hidden in sleeves. Elena outlined new policies for transparency at the company. Brian pledged to support her. Nora smiled faintly, a woman beginning again. And Lily, oh Lily, handed me a drawing of a house with all of us standing outside, smiling. She had, written at the bottom in wobbly letters, "Safe now." I looked around and realized family is not the absence of conflict. It is the decision to choose each other after the conflict is laid bare. I share this not just as a widow, a mother, a grandmother, but as a woman who learned that silence is never neutral. It either protects the oppressor or shields the vulnerable. I chose the latter. If you are listening and see pieces of your own story here, whether in bruises covered, finances questioned, or voices dismissed, know this: you are not powerless. You may not hold a legal will in your hand, but you hold something stronger: truth and the right to speak it. If you were in Margaret's place, what would you carry forward? Forgiveness or firm boundaries? Would you invite Richard back if he sought redemption, or is protection sometimes the only true form of love? Share your thoughts below, because sometimes justice is not about punishment. It's about finally being able to sit at the table, eat in peace, and know the next laugh won't be silenced by fear.